I welcome all the participants here to the very interesting session on the evolving cybersecurity landscape in the new normal. And I'm pretty sure that 1 hour time allotted to us will in no way justify the requirement of the topic to be discussed here. But then we will try and do whatever little justice we can do for this session. Before I proceed ahead, Kavita, can you confirm if Mr. Maheshwari has joined?
I'll just check. He was in the lobby. I'll just check.
And just a slight correction, I'm not the chairman, I'm just moderating a session. I'm pretty sure the people in the panel are much more experienced than me and have much wider knowledge in this field. And we will just try and learn from the experiences that they hold, and we will certainly go with a more knowledge base as we complete this session. Well, as Mr. Maheshwari joins, what I'll do is I'll briefly introduce the panelists who are there so that everybody is aware, especially for the audience. We have got a wide diversity of the audience. We have, to start with, we have Mr. Narinder Nath, an officer from the Indian Telecommunications Service, who's working as a joint secretary in the National Security Council Secretariat with responsibilities for coordination in the matters of cybersecurity activities by different entities of India in government, public, and private sectors. Prior to this, he was Deputy Director General in the Department of Telecommunications, Government of India, with overall responsibilities for policy formation and implementation and matters pertaining to telecom network security of India. He has over 30 years of telecom, including 20 years of senior management experience in the areas of telecom security, network planning, installation, operation, and maintenance. He was associated with Telecommunications Standards Development Society of India as the member of the GC. He was also director on the board of Tata Communications Limited and is currently on the board of Nixie. He holds masters in technology from IIT Delhi with specialization in VLSI design. Mr. Maheshwari, if he has joined or he'll be joining later, is a public policy consultant and senior visiting fellow in the think tank Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, that is ICRIER. Earlier, he led public policy in Semantics, Norton LifeLock, MasterCard, Microsoft, and SIFI over more than 2 decades with responsibilities spanning in India, ASEAN, and China. He has a keen research interest in interplay of policy with technological innovations and socio-economic development, especially in digital ecosystem. A graduate of engineering from IIT, he also has a degree in law. Mr. Jaspal Sawhney joined Tata Communications with over 25 years of experience in roles in cybersecurity, information risk, technology management with large financial institutions in Singapore and India. In his previous role as Chief Information and Security Officer and country head for Deutsche Bank franchise in India, Jaspal was responsible for information security governance and regulatory compliance for business operations in India and was running global information security delivery operations organizations set up within their Indian captives. In his role as Global Chief Information Security Officer of Tata Communications, Jaspal is responsible for establishing strategy and roadmap for the firms and governance structure, which will help implementation of necessary InfoSec program across GMC areas globally. Ratna Pawan is a significant and astute professional experience in financial services across risk management to include business continuity, information security, insider risk and vetting, physical security and fraud, then service excellence, retail branch management, operations. Her exposure across startup teams in HDFC Bank, Yes Bank, as well as in complex and matrix-driven global multinational banks like HSBC, ANB, AMRO, Standard Chartered Bank, Masrec Bank, has given her unique and detailed, insightful understanding of working across the complete spectrum of 3 lines of defense in a bank. juggling a diverse and global footprint. She has recently been inducted as a member of Global BCI Women Resilience Committee, an active panelist speaker at various industry forums, conferences, including Economic Times Forum, SecuTech, Business Continuity Institute, BCI, etc. Over the last decade, she has cemented her place as a subject matter expert in security risk domain. I have I have had the privilege of serving in the Indian Army for almost 23 years plus in the Corps of Signals, which is a technical arm of the Army, wherein I have also got opportunity to serve in both physical and cyber security areas. I have worked with the signal intelligence, had a opportunity to have a cyber offensive across our adversaries as well. Interesting thing. However, we'll proceed ahead as we go, and we'll seek the views and expert views, in fact, of the panelists who are here. So to set the context, I would say that COVID is a very interesting phenomenon, I would say. At the beginning of 2020, digital transformation was in many ways like an internet of late 90s in its nascent and exploratory phase, alluding but not quite manifesting its incredible possibilities. The last few months have, however, accelerated the digital transformation manifold. It is felt that COVID-19 has acted like a time machine. It has actually forced organizations to adopt technologies in weeks, whereas it would have normally taken them 3 to 4 or maybe 5 years to do so. Quite literally, it has eliminated several years in the digital transformation journey of an organization. So as a result, we have seen technology omitting barriers across businesses, imparting knowledge across oceans, allowing governments to continue delivering essential services, helping frontline workers battle the pandemic, and so much more. In this journey of technical advancement, the biggest and the most current challenge is that of cybersecurity. A vast amount of sensitive data are being exchanged digitally. There is a heightened use of personal devices, home networks, with workforce distributed and distracted. Cyber attacks across platforms are increasing. Holistic end-to-end data security has therefore become an integral and indispensable necessity for organizations in the new world post-COVID. Now, cyber security is no more a good to have. It's a must to have, especially for the smaller organizations who have not been able to achieve that so far. However, more than technology or strategy, I would say nurturing of the culture that recognizes cybersecurity as a top priority is critical. To develop this, there must be first synergy between the business leaders, functional leaders, and the security leaders, because the decisions that the former to make will determine the course of action for the later. Before I go on to take the views of our panelists here, I would just take a little time more of yours to introduce you to Colonel John Boyne, who was a defense man from the United States. He was in fact a fighter pilot during the Korean War in 50s. He was known as a 40-second man. 40-second as in 40 seconds man, because he was able to defeat all his opponents in combat within 40 seconds. But that is not what he is known for. As part of his jet fighter career, he developed a new theory, which was how to lead the combat. And this theory led to certain creation of modern jets like F-16, F-18, and how the military all around the world is leading the combat. And as part of this theory, he developed the concept of OODA loop, OODA loop. So OODA loop is a decision-making process where you observe what you have. So basically, you are looking at your environment, then you orient yourself to what you observe, then you make sense of what you have gathered to decide what you are doing, and you are acting based on this decision. Once acted, you start again. You look at the outcome of this decision, acting on it, you orient yourself, decide and act again. The outcome of this OODA loop, when put to the business is that I would say to those who can handle the quickest rate of change will survive. So it is not important for an aircraft or for anything how many weapons you have or how heavy is the load in your jet fighter. The question is how fast can you adapt to the rate of change? If you will apply this principle to thinking about the security in the modern world, it is not important how thick the wall is, or it is not important how many appliances or the network firewalls you have put in behind your network or maybe in front of your adversaries. I would say it is more important how fast you can react to the incident and how fast can you detect the incident in your network. So taking this OODA loop behind, what we all have accepted and nobody will have any doubt on that is that the pandemic has forced the remote working trends, thereby increasing the perimeter of endpoint entry to the organization's network. Earlier, the entry points to the network was defined by the network itself and the firewall gateway that could help, but now equation has changed. So firstly, coming to Ratna, a question for you. The most organizations that can and have adopted remote working, more and more organizations are declaring that the percentage or a percentage of complete workforce will work from home in near future. As a result, what are some of the enhanced cyber risks or what cyber security awareness and mitigants should be advised to all these employees who are working from home? Because it cannot be avoided. It's a very, very important aspect.
Absolutely. And apt question, if I may, to start the session with Colonel Zaidi. And I firstly must say that I'm really honored to be sharing this online dais with somebody like you and the other esteemed panelists with me. So let's start here on your question. And, we all acknowledge that this pandemic has literally battered individuals, organizations, governments, and economies alike in the last few months. And we probably will not see a return to normal until 2022 at least. But let's face it and let's acknowledge it that this whole situation could have been far worse without the ability for some of us to work from home. Certain sectors really that can work from home moved to working from home almost immediately. Of course, the transition was very painful at the back end, but from the customer point of view or regulatory point of view, the transition was quite swift, and that helped a lot of organizations and individuals deal with the economic backlash of not being able to continue their operations. And on the other hand, it also helped individuals and organizations maintain the physical distancing that was so necessary, which is why even today, in spite of organizations now, the economy is really opening up, companies are starting up, but a lot of the organizations that can work from home are actually saying that we will continue to work from home. Certain organizations have said either a percentage or all of our employees will work from home permanently. Now, that's something that we would never have seen coming in 2019. In fact, just yesterday, we received notification that DOT has further revised the OSP guidelines to ease the ongoing work from home, which will now encompass work from anywhere in India as well. And the agents that work from home will be treated as extensions of these OSP centers. However, we know that working remotely introduces some cyber risks that you alluded to, Colonel Zaidi, in your introduction, that dangerously threaten the organization's cybersecurity posture. Even prior to the pandemic, cybersecurity breaches were growing in both frequency and sophistication across industries. Let me refer to a Kaspersky Labs report that indicated that India had seen a 37% increase in cyber attacks in the first quarter of 2020, prior to the pandemic really hitting us, as compared to the fourth quarter of 2019. So the COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated an already existing problem. phishing emails claiming to be from World Health Organization offering free healthcare kits or deadly coronavirus maps are real-time examples of how cyber attackers are making various organizations and individuals their new target. I always love to refer to statistics and surveys because it just makes our job so much more easier. So let me just refer to a couple of quick surveys. One is the Cisco survey, which said that majority of Indian firms reported over 25% jump in cyber threats while working from home. A global survey by Barracuda Networks revealed around 66% of Indian organizations have suffered at least one data breach after shifting to the remote working model. 67% of employees of participating organizations from India had experienced an increase in email phishing attacks. In a Deloitte survey, 26% of survey respondents reported a 25% increase in fraudulent emails that they had seen and received. And very interestingly, stated also that they are currently tempted to keep copies of valuable company data in case the worst comes to happen, which means that if they are asked to leave or the organization becomes insolvent, then they would have that data. So the threat is not only from external malicious attackers, but it's also an insider risk that the organizations really need to deal with. The top three risks that the organizations really face are, firstly, I think the challenge with the largest proportion of Indian companies would be that today, people are logging in from home, which doesn't have the same security posture as we would have from office. The other concerns would include data privacy and protection against malware, right? Now, let's move on to what we can ask employees who are today enjoying the flexibility of working from home to be aware of, because I'm sure they're as concerned as their own organizations are about keeping their data safe, keeping their online security in place. This is an era where, apart from our own physical security, we also need to worry about our online security. So my top 10 advice to everybody listening in today would be, firstly, and most importantly, be aware. Remote work environments don't usually have the same safeguards as in office. When you're in office, you're working behind layers of preventive security controls that vanish suddenly when you're working from home. So be conscious of your environment. Second, protect your devices using complex passwords that you need to change regularly. You know, this may seem like the most simplest thing to do, but survey upon survey has or continue easy.
Ratna, we are losing you. I'll recommend if you switch off your video, I think we'll be able to hear you.
Information. Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you clear now.
Can you hear me clearly? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Next is we need to be our employees, everybody working from home, alert. Like I said in my first point, a survey conducted by CyberArk, a US firm, revealed that 77% of remote employees have been using managed insecure devices such as personal laptops and phones to access corporate systems. If you're using a computer, also use any ways enhance the risk exposure that for your data. So you have to be extremely careful. Avoid public Wi-Fi as much as possible. You can work from anywhere, but avoid public Wi-Fi that introduces significant security risk. If necessary, use personal hotspots, but avoid public Wi-Fi. A survey Morphisec, again a US-based firm, indicated that nearly 25% of employees working from home don't know what security protocols are in place on their devices. So that's the other piece that you need to be aware of. Next would be information confidentiality. With husband, wife, and almost room, the lines around information confidentiality has somehow got blurred. We are all listening to each other's conversations. So be very alert and conscious about decisions and discussions that you're having and the details that you're sharing over phones and so on. Follow information security protocols of your organization. Securely store, send, and dispose sensitive and restricted information and data. The next one would be follow your employer security practices. For that, you need to know what the practices are and therefore be extra careful there. Now, employees, it is, from an employee perspective, that is the top 10 that I have. Of course, organizations also have to increase and spend on their enhancing their security posture as much as possible. So organizations need to ensure that remote workers, as far as possible, are using company issued devices, or at least use encrypted enterprise driven services like the virtual private network, the VPNs basically. And organizations need to ensure that they're investing on educating staff and training on how to avoid and identify suspicious emails and malicious links and so on. Colonel Zaidi, I could just keep going on here, but I think I will stop and hand that back to you.
No, thank you, Ratna. It's very interesting. And in fact, the list, as you said, is huge, but you brought out very relevant point for employees to take care of while they're working from home, as well as the organizations. How can they ensure that the security of their network remains solid as far as possible? Now, coming to Mr. Jaspal, you have a very wide background of security, even to the extent of the financial services like banks and all. So the surge in communication and wholesale shift towards to operate business online have at some time increased the risk of cyber attacks by an order of magnitude. They have also introduced a wide range of risks of the organization's perimeter security at risk is being breached. They need always on surveillance and real-time risk analysis for breach, both physical as well as digital entry points. Now, the security and risk management leaders must safeguard their companies on massive scale and quickly. They must ensure that their enterprises, online service and digital platforms are resilient against cyber attacks. Since many companies haven't made their applications and data available previously over internet or VPN, as Ratna also brought out a little while ago, security leaders are reluctant to allow access without stringent access mechanisms. Understandably, very few organizations were prepared for their workforce to be working remotely in mass. Now they realize that secure remote access capability and protected access to the enterprise system have become a major constraint. So what would be your advice to such leaders? How should they proceed ahead in this field?
Good morning, Colonel Zaidi. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Thanks, first of all, for a great introduction and lending a wonderful context to the topic. Yes, an hour is always too less, and no security discussion ends up in the allotted time. But yes, we will try to cover various aspects between a few of us. So yes, I think right from cyber attacks targeted towards defense and research to the national critical infrastructure, be it pharmaceuticals or the global ICTs, 2020 has been an interesting year because this has turned cyber as one of the key business priority across all government, public, and private enterprises. While I would say between 2016, 18, maybe even some part of 19, the focus was more specifically targeted towards large financial institutions, working to avoid and mitigate complex, financial frauds, payment-based security attacks, cyber attacks. And to the global ICTs, I think the enormity, spread, and extent of cyber as a business problem has become of a very different scale in this year. Ever-rising cyber threat advisories and APT campaigns tagged to various state-sponsored threat actors have only been growing more innovative and more dangerous since the start of the year. So the depth of the problem has also increased multifold. I mean, if we talk about the recent FBI advisory, which refers to Chinese threat actors utilizing and kind of exploiting some of the vulnerabilities which existed for many years and as many as 25 different CVEs, you can well imagine the kind of intricacies behind these attacks and the corresponding preparedness an organization needs to protect against the threat actors. So talking about some key incidents, Ratna shared quite a vast list of industry sort of metrics. I will just talk about specific cases which bring us slightly closer to the topic. Now, the recent one was financially motivated cyber attack on Dr. Reddy's lab after they got confirmation to commence last stage of trials on the Russian COVID vaccine. So this is clearly, a sort of an espionage or financially motivated kind of an attack. Cyber attack on some of the national critical infrastructure. So the attacks on NHAI, National Highway Authority of India email servers, or hackers attacking the power sector, Jammu and Kashmir Power Department data center recently. Going up to something even more worrisome, the Chinese Army Secret Unit 61398, known for cyber espionage targeting India's defense and research. Of course, this is not limited just to the corporate and the government sector. About 1,000 odd Indian schools and colleges got attacked between July and September. And the list goes on. I think cyber is a real risk, and it's a risk for all of us, whether it is at a personal level, or it's at a enterprise level, or it's at a national critical infrastructure level. This is a risk which we all have to combat together in various roles and various capacities. I think two topics I would like to call out, since you specifically asked me about the changing priorities and the organizations having to stack up to respond to a completely unprepared situation. I'm not a big fan of a security theater or analyst buzzwords like a SASE or a zero trust. I wasn't, but I think if there is any good time or a better time to begin experimenting and adapting parts of these frameworks. These are big frameworks, both SASE or Zero Trust, which share some commonalities at various points. These are, I would refer to them as frameworks because the CIOs and CISOs and the CTOs would take years to implement them across the technology stack. This is not something where one vendor walks in with a silver bullet and says they got a solution for everything for your enterprise. However, if there was ever a better time to try, some of these concepts, then probably this is the time. This goes back to some of the points made earlier in the session about when the pandemic hit us in March. Sometime all of us got taken by surprise, and the most business continuity playbooks, even coming from the most of the stringent financial institutions. Never thought about continuity and disaster scenarios playing beyond 14 days. So 1 day, 3 days, 7 days, 14 days, and that's where it ended. Now here we are in the 10th month, and we still don't know where this ends, right? And every bit of a possible assumption on what we considered as the baseline security control, what we considered as the need for proximal operations, all of those bases have been challenged, and they have been tested, and they have been worked around in some innovative ways. And that to Ratna's earlier point, that but for the innovation brought in by the industry and the enablement led by the technology sector and various providers, we would not have been able to last this long and in this smart way. But however, while on one side the focus has been on enabling and connecting people, at the same time, not many organizations were prepared to decentralize the security controls in this big way. Most organizations were also not prepared to face a situation where they would have to let loose the controls by allowing people to connect through all kind of endpoints and almost having zero to very little control on these endpoints. So where does this leave us? This leaves us to the point of very fundamental zero trust architecture foundings as to depending upon where you come from, what machine you use, what controls you bring, what type of network you connect from, the enterprise should be in a position to allow a connectivity which is having a fine-grained access control, be able to allow certain things to happen, certain things not to happen. And this is a big topic. But yes, I think there are solutions available. There are network fabric, network as a service, various SIG, SWG kind of solutions. But I think this is the time when the firms need to actively start looking at moving the investments and the controls away from the data centers and the firewalls and the VPNs and bring them closer to the edge and to the perimeter-less network. So that's one topic which I think is a big one, and this requires the CIOs, the CTOs, and the CISOs to really work in close collaboration, establish a roadmap, because this roadmap is not just to deal with the pandemic, but like someone said earlier, this is also our opportunity collectively as an industry to define some very unique, innovative operating models, zero-touch models, low-touch models, or whatever we call them. But this would also become the foundation for the future efficiencies and future collaborations, right? So I think this is the time to look into how do we enable the firm's digital transformation agendas to be built strongly on top of some of these foundation layers. That's one topic. The second topic, of course, is a little bit more specific on the endpoints. And since endpoints have been called as the new perimeter, and with all kind of data being available now on the endpoints, the firms need to really start looking at what's now the new hype cycle term called unified endpoint security, which is usually a combination of a UEM, which is a unified endpoint management, provisioning, deprovisioning, control, policies, enablement, disablement, all of those things. Data loss prevention, because yes, we have to be real that in present sort of world where firms are still trying to switch back to standard desktop, standard endpoints, there is still a significant window of exposure where there is little to no controls available on the endpoints. And this means that firms' critical assets, the data, is at risk. So having adequate DLP controls, whether it is on the cloud through what I'm going to talk next, which is CASB and then various CASB controls, or it's on the endpoint and with the combination of certain network layer controls, it's absolutely important to have a well-defined strategy and do the right data markings and data classification. The third thing which is absolutely important is the cloud access security broker. And all of us are talking about cloud first, and this becomes, the cloud adoption becomes all the more faster with the current pandemic situation. But where does this leave us with visibility and controls around both sanctioned IT as well as on the shadow IT? I think this is a big topic. And once again, there is hardly any merit in putting all the controls around sanctioned IT without having the right level of visibility around what's happening from the endpoints with unsanctioned IT, both in terms of access as well as in terms of data movement. So CASB is the third important element. And yes, I think EDR, EPP as the next gen evolution to advanced antiviruses, conventional antiviruses, which bring us more of analytics, more of machine learning, more of a real-time response and live action capability on various attacks which get perpetrated on the endpoints, which often become the foothold and the starting point for the most complex ransomware attacks, malware attacks, or large APTs, I think becomes an important element as part of your unified endpoint security strategy. So I would like to take a pause with these two broad topics and the backdrop on what cyber is in this new world for us.
Great, thank you so much. I think nobody will disagree with you in saying that all playbook rules have been challenged now in this pandemic has made us think that. We'll come back to the discussions that you have initiated. But since you also brought out the point of critical infrastructure and role of organizations like Chinese intelligence agencies, I would come to Deepak for this, Mr. Maheshwari. As COVID has dramatically reshaped the global society into the new normal, many organizations that never considered themselves to be part of critical infrastructure discussions are now classified as such. While most of the organizations impacted by cyber attack may risk losing data or financial information, such a successful attack on a critical infrastructure could potentially impact health, safety, environment, security. The list is endless. So what, according to you, should be the critical infrastructure protection amidst the changing geopolitics as of now? You are on mute. Mr. Maheshwari, you are on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Thanks, Colonel Zadi, and everybody for this opportunity, and CII. So I think when we come to this whole thing about critical infrastructure protection, I mean, in India, we have this concept. It's not a new concept. Of course, NCIIPC is just a few years old, but conceptually, CIIP has been on the statute book since 2000, since the 27th October 2000, when the IT Act came into force. So we have this type of situation. But what's happened is that we have identified only 6 sectors at this point of time, and the critical infrastructure protection. And by the way, while telecom, energy, transport, and BFSI, they are there, healthcare is still not there, not yet. Despite the fact that we have this whole COVID situation this year, it's still not been recognized as a critical infrastructure sector. And as Paul just mentioned about the attack on Dr. Reddy's and many others for that matter, I think it's a high time that we at least include healthcare as a critical infrastructure sector within the scope. That's one thing. At the same time, the challenges are not limited only to healthcare per se. There are many other situations, there are many other type of organizations and contexts that we need to factor in. So, example, Ratna did mention about many of the surveys, and just Paul did mention about zero trust and other frameworks. Now, what is happening is that the moment we are talking about, it is not just about cloud first, it's not just about remote access, it is also about mobile first. Because for a lot of people, for example, right now, I'm actually connected on this webinar on my mobile device, okay? So there are a whole lot of situations that people are actually connecting through their mobile devices, through tablets, smartphones, etc. Also, even if they are not using the mobile device per se for the particular work, they might be actually creating hotspots, as was mentioned earlier, through their mobile devices. So mobile itself is also becoming a very important aspect. And oftentimes, even large organizations have actually not really bothered so much about the endpoint security on their mobile devices as much as they have done on the laptop. I would say that perhaps they need to focus more, disproportionately more on the mobile devices security than they are doing on the laptops, because the mobile itself, being the type of environment where it is being used, etc., is much more vulnerable. Besides that, we also have a much higher chances of a physical loss of a device or somebody else using that. It's much higher. And that's why I would say that the focus should be much more on that. Now, when we are looking at the critical infrastructure protection, we also have a concept of a protected system in the country. But the fact is that in the past 20 years, less than 10 systems have been notified by the central government as a protected system. And some of the state governments have also notified some systems. Of course, there have been extreme situations. For example, some state governments notified that each and every computer and computer network belonging to that state government is a protected system, which again, I think is a neither pragmatic nor desirable. And at the same time, many other states governments have yet to notify a single system as a protected system. So under this type of situation, I think as part of this national cybersecurity strategy that Mr. Narendranath is here right now from the Office of National Cybersecurity Coordinator's office, I think we need to relook at some of these things, whether we do really need to have a requirement of notifying something as a protected system, or we should have other type of processes in place, which are, so it could be a more classified type of action, and we could still be doing. I'm pretty sure that many of the systems are not yet notified only because of this type of apprehension, that we just don't want to sort of announce on GLSR. And I think that's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. But at the same time, the statute itself needs a commensurate amendment and modification. Second thing is that many of the other things in terms of what NCIIPC has done, in terms of the basic controls, etc., what should be done, and many organizations are already using those. I think the awareness of those and transmission of those in the sector regulators is rather low and a bit inconsistent. So if we look at the financial services itself, just one example, one sector, we've got 4 different regulators there. We've got RBI for banks, NBFCs, and payment systems. We've got IRDAI, which is for insurance. We've got SEBI, which is for stock markets and stock exchanges, clearing houses, etc. And of course, we have the PFRDA, which is for pension funds. Now, the first 3 have already come out with their own detailed cybersecurity frameworks. So SEBI came out with on 6th July 2015, RBI on 2nd of June 2016, and then we had IRDAI on 7th of April 2017. Now, if you look at the detailing, SEBI is at a very high level. RBI goes a little bit deeper, and IRDAI actually has got a list of 317 items in an Excel sheet. So I think we also need to have this type of consistency across the sector, because whether you look at SBI or ICICI or HDFC, or for that matter, many other financial groups, you have a group which is actually being regulated under all these 2 or 3 or even 4 regulators. So it becomes much easier for them to adopt and comply with these type of requirements if there's consistency and collaboration across these type of frameworks. The second aspect is that whenever something wrong happens, people do have to, of course, report. And where do they report? Typically, there are 3 broad places anyway, apart from the law enforcement. So we have certain, so they need to report to certain. We have sector regulators, and we also have NCIIPC. Now, each of them have got their own different templates. And as and when something does happen in any organization, one is that a lot of organizations are still not reporting things. And even when they do report some breach or something like that, I think a lot of effort and time is taken only in terms of complying with these different type of templates and protocols about how and how much information shall be shared with which organization. And again, I think that's one area ripe for standardization and better collaboration. The other 2 aspects that we do need to look at is this. I think it is an inevitable that in many situations people will work on their personal devices. So, but at the same time, instead of BYOD, that is leading to something I call it CYOD. That is, you carry on your own disaster. Okay, and in this type of situation, it is much better that the organizations actually try to create virtual machines within the personal devices of the individual, even if they are using those individual machines. So at least as and when they are doing the VM operation from their individual endpoint, it is much better that we have better security. But the other thing is that we should also use this as an opportunity for a broader and a more societal aspect. Many other people in the family or in the neighborhood may or may not be familiar with the do's and don'ts about cybersecurity and cyber safety. And I think through these type of efforts, through the employees, I think we should also use this as an opportunity for transmitting this message about cyber hygiene and well-being in the broader society, itself. The other aspect that we should look at is, on one hand, yes, I feel actually vindicated from this notification that came from DOT last evening about doing away with the registration and bank guarantee and other type of things for OSPs. So that's a fantastic thing. And I had actually written publicly about it way back in October 2004. So yes, so more 16 years back, but nevertheless it has happened. But while we should give all this type of flexibility to the business, and I'm all for it, we should also at the same time enhance our risk-based assessment and vigilance mechanism, so that I mean, India is also known for calls fraud, for example. One area and that's a lot of distributed internationally for free. So I think we should, while we are doing these type of things, and so far they were. Now that we have done away with that type of, I think this is high time. We also need to look at what is it that we should be doing. So ultimately, when we are looking at risk-based assessment, still not very clear. It's at least 20 years, almost 20 weeks that I have been involved in that is the policy around inflation. And that's one area where I would say it's still we have a lot of confusion and contradictory requirements under different regulations from different regulators. And that's one area. I know it's a tough thing. It's every country in the world is struggling with it. But nevertheless, that's one area that we look at. And right now, yes, we have elections going on in Bihar. There was also election in the US for the president as well as several other elections. And one of the important things that happened, people do not realize this. In the US, yes, have identified 16 sectors critical infrastructure protection. They call it just CIP. And under DHS and there are 16 sectors. But in January 2017, just a few days before President Obama came into office, the Secretary of Defense also notified the election system as a specific critical infrastructure protection. And I would say that on the EVM side, yes, we have had a lot of debates and discussions around that, around security of EVMs, and I think that's doing very well. But at the election system in the country, we also need to have much better mechanism even there at this point of time. And one small point and a long-standing grouse, a lot of public sector officials continue to use their personal mail IDs even today. And I would say that's one of the biggest security risk in any situation that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maheshwari. Full credit to you for remembering all the various laws and advisories and various things which are there in the government. You always have it on your fingertips. It's a very amazing facet that you have. Coming to you, Mr. Narendranath, there's a list of questions that Mr. Maheshwari has already posed to you. But earlier speakers also had certain things which had elements of government involved into it. And we would like to understand from you what are the efforts being taken by the government. We certainly know that there are a large number of activities which are being conducted by the government and especially your office in helping us mitigate the cybersecurity risks which are happening all over the world, especially in our country. So we would like to understand from you what are the actions which are being taken by the government. And also another important aspect is that what is the government doing to earn the trust of the people to ensure that most of the malicious cybersecurity attacks are reported? As Mr. Maheshwari brought out, there are 3 agencies, but the number of attacks which are reported are much lower. So over to you, sir, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I know we had 3 different comprehensively covers complete threat land that we have. And it also, mentions some of the actions that people have been taking, and some suggestions also are there about what actions could be taken. There's some observations from the comments that my co-panelists have made. One, as Ratna Madam has said that there's been that organizations have been battered. She started off with that. But I think, you know, if you look at it, there are some organizations that have prospered also.
Yes.
Yeah. So actually, so this is one. And then the other thing that came out is that, you know, people going online and businesses going online and students going online. But one of the things that this has brought out is it's accentuated the, you know, divide that is already there. You know, that you find that there's a lot of population that doesn't have access to internet either because of the geographical location where they are and then they don't have infrastructure there, or because of cost considerations, they don't have access to the devices which will, you know, facilitate them to access that. So this is a challenge. I will not say it's a security challenge, but then it's a national issue, and it can, you know, escalate into a security challenge in terms of you know, people not being happy, and you'll have social unrest and all of that. So it's very important that this COVID-19 has, though you say that digitalization has happened and what should have taken long years has really happened within a few months. But what we find is the digitalization has happened where the infrastructure is already there and where you find that people could afford the services. That's where you find that the uptake on digitalization, there was a laid back, lazy attitude of doing things, and people were not really, because they were in a comfort zone. And those people who had the infrastructure facilities, those who had the you know, muscle power, they quickly migrated to the digital platform and they've continued the business. But the have-nots who are there, and there are a lot of people who are have-nots, they have not been able to come on the platform. And that, from a security perspective, there are two dimensions to it, in the sense that it could create social unrest is one part. The other part is when we do get these people on board, you know, these are people who might not be very highly digital literate. And you will find that the type of attacks that we're seeing now, it's not that there is a you know, trend to attack the big companies and then you know, big ticket companies which are there. But there is also a trend to say that, you know, you are you know, doing the mass attacks there, where you're actually filching from people who are not digitally literate, and they might be small amounts, but aggregated, they find that the threat actors are saying that aggregated, you're actually making money. So this is one cause that we have to address. How do you address, especially like all the panelists have mentioned about the use of end devices? I think end device security in this context becomes very important. It's important from the perspective of a company, but it's also important from the perspective of an individual citizen who is going to use a device for his education, his entertainment, and for running all the financial services. So that, I think, is one important part. And when we look at coming up with end device security, we also have to factor in the requirements of this section of the population. You know, this I thought I will just take off from where you have talked about. Then I will answer some of the questions that Maheshwari ji has touched upon. I will not say answer, but I'll touch upon those because answer is a very powerful statement. So one is that regarding healthcare, it's acknowledged that healthcare is not designated as a critical information infrastructure. This office has actually taken up with the Ministry of Health to onboard them on that. We have had discussions with them. Is to be frank, yes, there's a lot of healthcare data that is there in the private sector. We know that we have a like the All India Institute of Medical Sciences or your Safdarjung Hospital, that is covered under some cybersecurity framework, but lots of the private sector hospitals or the diagnostic centers are not covered in this. So it is essential that we have a proper framework for protection of the data that is there in this infrastructure, and we have taken up with the Ministry of Health to onboard them. Then he also raised the point: do we require to notify the protected systems? Yeah, I know it's a complicated process, and that is something that at NSCS we have been looking at. The NCSS, which you also mentioned about, is a document that is we are trying to make it comprehensive document. We have had wide-ranging consultations both with the industry, within the government, and we have invited consultation from individuals also who are interested to give. All those inputs have been consolidated, and it tries to cover the complete gamut of the cyberspace. Okay, so including the current institutional infrastructure, which is fragmented, how to consolidate it, all that, or how to bring bridges between the institutional infrastructure so that we have a coordinated response to cybersecurity. So that is also part of the National Cybersecurity Strategy 2020 that is in the works, and it's a very advanced stage. It's an approval process now for getting approved. So one of the things that he pointed out was regarding SEBI, RBI, IRDI. Lots of things, when you talk of the cybersecurity policies that they have, lots of things are similar that they could have. It's like everybody tries to reinvent the wheel, and then they come up with their own different wheels, and basically all the wheels do not cover the requirements. So it's required to, and I was, as is rightly pointed, I was there in the telecom sector. This is one thing we found. The sector regulator there has mandates that all of the operators have a security policy, and they should submit it to the regulator. But when we went through the security policies, we find that each of the documents is different. Some documents are a single page or 2-page documents, while others are very comprehensive documents. Some of the big operators, like we have Mr. Jaswal Singh Sani here, like Tata Communications or Vodafone or others, they have really comprehensive security policies which they implement in the organizations. So one of the things that we did there at that point was to come up with a baseline cybersecurity policy document, and there we took the industry into confidence, and I'll acknowledge that bulk of the inputs that went into the document were for the industry, and that was circulated to all the operators, saying that this is the baseline security policy document, and everybody should have a security policy which has these minimum features. They could add something more than that. So something like that may be required to be done by the different sectoral regulators, so that we have consistency and across that. Then regarding reporting, yes, the Information Technology Act has certain provisions for reporting, and there are rules for the CERT which are there, where there are certain reporting requirements. I think there are certain deficiencies which we have found, because there is some mandatory reporting that they talk about, and that mostly covers everything. But then what are the penalty clauses and all of that is also there. It says that we could ask for information, but then if the information is supplied, then you have this 3 years imprisonment or fine and all of that. But that it falls out of that you give out an advisory or you give out a notice for information. But reporting suo motu from that is not. It's a gray area that I think we'll have to look into. But some of the sectoral regulators have got mandates, like the telecom sector, the financial sector has got mandates that reporting has to happen both to the regulator and to the CERT. But I'll not say that every sector has this reporting requirement. But I think once we have the NCSS coming, where we are actually reporting is one of the parts of the National Cybersecurity Strategy, the requirements that will come. Then I think election system, personal mail IDs, I think that is something that we have to pursue. There is a policy that people should not be using personal email IDs. Yeah, so this, I think broadly, I've touched upon some of the points that have come about. But some of my own points, I think we are reaching the end. So I'll take 3 minutes.
Yes, please.
Okay. So some of the things is, we are talking of COVID situation and all of that, but there are some basic hygiene requirements that we find are not satisfied. We get, reports about vulnerabilities and breaches based on what our security agencies do, scanning and all of that. We find that, basic vulnerabilities like cross-site scripting or directory listing, all of these are, they keep on occurring on a repeated basis. And these are something that have been there for ages. I mean, Christ was born after this, and still you find that these are available. So I think this basic hygiene and the basic design philosophy of secure by design, addressing all of these design requirements, is something that organizations do require. And this is not something that I'm finding, if we find in few organizations, it's across organizations that we find this basic vulnerabilities, which are well-known vulnerabilities are there. It's either because they're not employing proper people for designing the systems. I think that has something that I think people have to look at. So that is one. The other aspect that is, there's a tremendous amount of trust deficit that is occurring now with the cyber split that is happening, new alignments that are coming in. And there's a fear of the state actors, coming in big way in attacking not only critical infrastructure, what we define as critical infrastructure, but other infrastructure also, which we currently do not define as critical infrastructure, because it disrupts the economic activity of the country. So this is one area. I think a lot of we might, we're looking at, putting in place some national infrastructure for traffic monitoring to see at the metadata level to see, what is the type of traffic that is coming in and protect the cyberspace, all the companies, they have to protect it. So that is one thing that we are looking at. Then the other thing I've touched upon this point is that, multiple small attacks the evolving threat landscape is something that I think we will be seeing. We are concerned about big companies, but I think multiple small attacks, and especially, we had this task force meeting of the CIA where I was asked to address them. They're the first meeting. And the SMEs, how do you protect the SMEs? Now, this is one area, and most of the SMEs can't afford to put in place many of the cybersecurity measures, or do not have the wherewithal to hire expensive consultants to put in place cybersecurity measures for them. So to have, aggregated cybersecurity infrastructure for the SMEs is one part of it. And of course, then other thing, a pet subject for me is the IoT security. Now, IoT devices are being deployed, and the Gartner has talked about 25 billion devices being deployed by the next year, and 75 billion by 2025. Now, and we had a session before this. I didn't know this session was there, but just 5 minutes into before our session, I joined in there. So that they were discussing about IT, not specifically security, but still there is no incentive currently for anybody to market and deploy a secure IT device. And most of the IT devices are I'm not talking of Industry 4.0 and such cases where people would be very careful and type of IT devices are deployed. They might take measures to see that the device is secure. But lots of devices are going into the retail sector. And those devices are a security threat by themselves because they could be used as bots. And also they could be used for collecting data. So this is one area that, and currently, we don't have a framework in the country that somebody wants to purchase a secure IT device, he will get a secure IT device. So this is one area. We had recently a workshop that we had done, and we have also funded a project with IIC Bangalore to have a ecosystem in place for seeing to that we, a citizen of this country or a company in this country, can go and purchase a certified secure IoT device which they will deploy. And that is essential for ensuring security of the cyberspace. I think the time is over, and I'll stop here. And and I think you can.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Narkar. And as Mr. Jaspal mentioned in the starting itself, that the time for cybersecurity discussions is never a limit. I mean, it's always unlimited, and we have not been able to even discuss any of the major issues that was brought out, and no further discussions could be made. But I'm sure the audience would have learned so much from each of the values or the points which have been brought out by each of the panelists. Thank you so much for everybody. Thank you. And addressing the audience. It was a great experience. And I would say there were quite a few questions in the Q&A section also and otherwise, but for the benefit of time, we'll answer them offline. Once again, I take this opportunity to thank all the panelists for taking out their time and sharing their experiences and their values with us. So nice of you. Thank you so much once again.